Hey, Noah, what's with all the wires and gadgets in here?
Oh, hey, Pete. I've been working on a little project to help us with our next episode.
A project? Are you trying to build a robot or something?
Not exactly. I'm building an AI to help us with the math in our podcast. You know, to keep things fresh and exciting for our listeners.
An AI? Like artificial intelligence? That sounds ambitious. What exactly does this AI do?
Well, Pete, it's going to help us explain mathematics and AI. It's going to be like having a third host, except it won't eat all the snacks in the break room.
But are you sure you know what you're doing, Noah? I mean, you're not exactly a computer genius.
Hey, I'll have you know I've been taking online courses in programming and AI. I'm practically a pro now.
Ha, sure, Noah. Just don't accidentally create a rogue AI that takes over the world, all right?
No worries, Pete. I've got everything under control. Besides, we're just using it for the podcast. What's the worst that could happen?
Famous last words, my friend. But I'm curious to see how this AI-assisted episode turns out. Can we test it out before we start recording?
Sure thing. Let me just boot it up. All right, AI, introduce yourself.
Hello, Pete and Noah. I am the AI assistant for today's episode of the Math Club podcast. I am here to help you explore the fascinating world of artificial intelligence.
Wow, Noah, I'm impressed. This AI sounds pretty advanced, but how exactly is it going to help us during the episode?
It can provide real-time explanations and examples as we discuss different topics related to AI. Plus, it has access to a vast knowledge base, so it can answer any questions we might have.
That's cool, but can it make jokes? You know how much our listeners love our witty banter.
Well, let's find out. Hey, AI, can you tell us a math joke?
Certainly. Why was the equal sign so humble? Because it knew it wasn't greater than anyone else.
Okay, that's not bad. I guess it'll fit right in.
Told you. Now let's get ready to record the episode. Just imagine the possibilities, Pete. With the AI's help, this could be our best episode yet.
All right, I'm game. Let's do this, Noah. And welcome to the team, AI.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
All right, Noah, I got a question for you. Was that real life or was that just fantasy?
Well, that's an interesting question, Pete. And I know that typically in our episodes, once we finish our opening sketch, we don't spend that much time talking about it in the rest of the episode. But this sketch came about in a different way. And I think the process was interesting enough that our listeners would like to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah, in fact, I would like to hear more about it myself.
So one thing that you might have noticed, Math Club, is that we sounded a little different in that opening sketch than we normally do. And that's because that wasn't actually us delivering those lines.
Wait a second. That wasn't me in the opening sketch?
No, Pete, that wasn't you. Do you remember recording that?
No, I don't, actually.
Well, when we decided we wanted to do an episode about math and AI, we thought it would be kind of cool and interesting if we had a sketch that was completely created by AI. So that sketch, one, was written by an AI, namely ChatGPT. And two, those voices you heard were AI-generated voice clones of the two of us. None of what you just heard was either written by or recorded by us.
All right, so walk me through this because I know this is really something that you were taking on. So you went to ChatGPT and you said, okay, ChatGPT, write us a funny opening sketch. And then that's what it came up with. Is that how it worked?
Well, the prompt writing was a little bit more involved than that. And I really enlisted the aid of my son because he is very good at this. When I first tried it, I asked ChatGPT to write an opening sketch for a podcast called The Math Club with two hosts, Pete and Noah, discussing math and AI. And it turned in something that was passable, but it didn't sound like one of our sketches. And then my son had the idea to expand the prompt. I never really experimented around with this before, but you can write rather long and detailed prompts. And I'm going to share with you and the listeners the prompt that we ended up using to create that sketch. It went like this. I need you to write the opening sketch for a podcast episode. Pete and Noah host a math podcast called The Math Club. They've been best friends for about 30 years since they met in college. In the podcast, they explain complex mathematical concepts while making it appealing to listeners. Pete is a mathematician, and Noah loves math, but is not a professional mathematician. In the episodes, there's an opening sketch to introduce the math concept, Then Pete usually explains the math to Noah throughout the episode. They make witty jokes and occasionally playfully make fun of each other. All right, so we tried generating a sketch from there, and it got much closer, but it still didn't have our lovable math club style and banter to it. And then Adam had an excellent idea, and we added this next bit to the prompt. We added, to give you an example of their style, here's the opening sketch they wrote for a previous episode. And then we pasted in one of our sketches.
I can't believe that that is a single prompt to ChatGPT. Like normally I'm thinking like, I might write an email to a friend and then go, actually, you know what, ChatGPT, rewrite this in the style of Dr. Seuss just to see what it does. But that's like a one-line prompt. And then I paste in the thing. You guys wrote paragraphs explaining what ChatGPT was supposed to do.
Right. And it paid off in spades because the result that we ended up getting was so much better than the one that we originally got when we just asked it to write an opening sketch for a podcast episode.
Yeah. In fact, I remember the first time you played it for me, I laughed several times throughout. I was like, that's really funny, ChatGPT.
Well, I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you? I make you laugh? What do you mean funny? Funny how? How am I funny?
Now, one other thing I want to add, when we gave ChatGPT the additional information of here's an example sketch that we've used in the past, what it did on its next iteration was it pulled some funny bits from that sketch and put them into the one it was writing. So then we went back to the drawing board one last time and added this to the prompt. Note, this is just an example. Do not include anything from the example in the new script. Then we went on to say, they're making an episode about math and AI. Please write the script for their opening sketch. The basic idea is that Noah is making an AI to help them with the episode. And that now concludes the prompt.
I can't believe, first of all, that ChatGPT was able to ingest all of that context and use it in a meaningful way. I mean, the end product we like, it was good. And ChatGPT followed the rules. Like that bit about please do not use any content from this old sketch, just use it as inspiration. That's a little mind blowing to me that that was understandable to ChatGPT. Like, what? Really?
Yeah, I was kind of blown away by that too, Pete. And then to take it another step further, we used a different AI from a company called 11 Labs to create AI voice models of both of us. We gave it a little bit of a sample of our voices from some previous episodes, and then it generated an AI voice model for you and for me. Then all we had to do was feed the ChatGPT generated script into the voice model, and we were off.
I love that. And I have to say, I haven't yet seen any snacks disappear from the break room. So I think all around, it's been successful.
I haven't either, but now at least I know that if I ever eat your snacks, I can blame it on the AI.
All right. Thank you for that overview. I love that opening sketch. Now, I want to say that as we were thinking about what to focus on during this episode, we already had this sketch idea in mind. You and I talked about a lot of different possibilities. And I think it was a couple of weeks ago when I came across a New York Times article that sort of sparked my attention. The title of the article is AI is Coming for Mathematics Too.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
And so right away, I thought, ooh, that's slightly sinister sounding, but it's also really intriguing. And you and I talked about it. We both read the article and we decided that, hey, the focus of this episode will be, can AI do math? And of course, we want a special emphasis on ChatGPT. It's what we used in the opening sketch, and it's something that you and I have familiarity with beyond what we're talking about here. But that's sort of the crux. Can AI do math? And can ChatGPT do math? That's an interesting question, slightly smaller scope, but I think I'd like to know, what can ChatGPT do in terms of mathematics?
I'd like to know that too. Do you have an initial hunch?
Well, you know, I will say that ChatGPT has definitely impressed me before. And thinking back to right around the time I had read this New York Times article, just coincidentally, we were working on a previous episode, Dome Sweet Dome, and I had a question about why are spheres so strong? I sort of knew roughly, but I wanted to get sort of a precise answer. And I went to Google and I typed the question in. Well, one of the hits was for a Quora discussion, the website Quora, which is largely a question and answer discussion board. Well, I clicked on the link, and at the top of all of the answers was an answer provided by ChatGPT. And I thought, that's crazy. I've never seen ChatGPT answering questions on a discussion board before. So I clicked on it to see what ChatGPT had to say, and the answer was great. I really liked it. In fact, I read it and I thought, I don't need any more info. This covered all the bases.
That's pretty impressive right there. Can you share a little bit of the response that ChatGPT gave to that query, just to give us an idea of what it was capable of?
Yeah, here's the first sentence or two. Okay, so the question was, why are spheres so strong? And here's what ChatGPT wrote. Spheres are strong because their shape distributes stress evenly across the surface, unlike other shapes like cubes or cylinders, which have corners and edges that can be more easily damaged. Additionally, a sphere has the smallest possible surface area for a given volume, which means that there is less surface area that can be affected by external forces. So crisp, to the point, is jam-packed with some mathematics and physics, of course, at a high level, but it's well written. It sounds great.
Yeah, and I would even hazard a guess that if it hadn't labeled that response as being from ChatGPT and you had just read it, you would never have known that it wasn't a person that wrote that.
Right. In fact, I probably would have thought like, wow, this was written by a person who A, knows what they're talking about, and B, has put some thought into their answer because it's pretty polished.
Yeah. But now, getting back to our question of can an AI do math? Because that explanation, however impressive, wasn't really an example of ChatGPT having to do any math. It was just explaining a mathematical topic. So now let's talk about how we started putting ChatGPT to the test. Remember the granola bar problem?
Yeah, you told me about that. You came across that problem on Facebook. Is that right?
That's right. I was reading through one of the math groups that I'm a part of on Facebook, and the question wasn't really asking people, what's the answer? It was asking people, how quickly can you calculate the answer? The question was, I plan to eat 4 granola bars every day during my 7-day hike. How many boxes of 20 granola bars will I need to buy?
Okay, right. So, that's not a terribly difficult problem. And I can see why the original poster was curious about how quickly people could get to an answer, but I think that's a good candidate for asking ChatGPT.
Right. And so did I. And so I asked ChatGPT that question. In fact, I typed it in exactly the way I just read it. And here's what ChatGPT gave me back in response. To calculate how many boxes of 20 granola bars you will need for your 7-day hike, where you plan to eat 4 granola bars every day, you can use the following formula. Number of granola bars per day times number of days divided by number of granola bars per box. And I got to pause here, Pete, to tell you, I was a little concerned that ChatGPT was going to get the question wrong if it just used that formula, because I thought it would say 4 times 7 is 28, 28 divided by 20 is 1.4. And in fact, it did go through those exact steps as it evaluated the expression and came up with an answer of 1.4.
Right. Now, to a person who shops in stores and buys things, it's not very often that I buy 4/10 of a box of anything. So I'm thinking already like, oh, ChatGPT, you kind of blew it.
But hang on, Pete, because I didn't read you the entire response. After it gave the answer of 1.4, it had one more little addendum to mention. It said, since you can't buy a fraction of a box, you will need to round up to the nearest whole number. So you will need to buy at least 2 boxes of 20 granola bars to have enough for your 7-day hike with a few extras.
Wow, Noah, I think I need to bring ChatGPT with me to the store the next time I go shopping because that was pretty good.
Yeah, and I think that gives us a little bit of an insight into, can ChatGPT do math? Well, in this case, it seems to be doing a pretty good job, not only of following the mathematical algorithms, but also of adding a little bit of common sense in checking to see if its answer was correct.
Which I love because as a mathematician, I like to check my own work and I often look for clever ways to do that. And when I was in the classroom teaching, I would coach students on, great, you have an answer. How can we check to see if it's correct? Does it make sense in the real world? And ChatGPT did that, which is fantastic.
Right. Now, I recall that when I shared this with you, there was another more famous problem that it reminded you of.
That's right. It reminded me of a math problem, which is lovingly known as the Chicken McNuggets problem. And we talked about this in the context of ChatGPT. But let me give you a formal statement of the problem that I found from a textbook that I'm familiar with. The book is called Integers, Polynomials, and Rings. It is written by a former math professor of mine, Ron Irving, over at the University of Washington. Fantastic book, by the way. And in that book, here's how he states the problem. McDonald's sells Chicken McNuggets in boxes of 6, 9, and 20. By buying various quantities of each box size, you can buy many different amounts of Chicken McNuggets. However, you cannot buy every possible amount. For instance, you cannot buy 5 McNuggets or 8 McNuggets. What other amounts of Chicken McNuggets is it not possible for you to buy? Is there a largest such amount? And if so, what is it? Okay, so that's a particular formulation of the problem. I wanted to look it up so we had an exact statement to reference. And you asked ChatGPT some variation of this.
I did. It was almost the exact same problem that you just said, but I'll share with listeners the version that I gave ChatGPT in its prompt. The way I asked it, I said, Chicken McNuggets can be purchased in quantities of 6, 9, and 20 pieces. You can buy exactly 15 pieces by purchasing a 6 and a 9, but you can't buy exactly 10 McNuggets. What is the largest number of McNuggets that cannot be purchased? That's the way we posed the problem to ChatGPT.
Essentially the same. I mean, yes, there's a few linguistic differences, but yeah, good to go. What did ChatGPT say?
Here's the answer that it gave us. This problem is a classic example of the Chicken McNugget theorem. And I got to stop there for a second and say that ChatGPT already made me laugh just in its opening remarks because of the expression, the Chicken McNugget theorem. Is that a real thing in math, Pete, or is that something ChatGPT just made up on the spot?
Oh, it's definitely real. It's like you've got Ronald McDonald's conjecture.
Good morning, class.
Good morning, Ronald.
You've got the hamburgers hypothesis.
Rubble, rubble?
You know, it's just part of the whole theory of McDonald's, I think.
Okay, moving on. This problem is a classic example of the Chicken McNugget theorem, which deals with finding the largest number that cannot be expressed as a combination of two given relatively prime numbers. In this case, the numbers are 6 and 9. And you might notice, Pete, that already ChatGPT has made a fatal error. It's completely dismissed the option of a 20 McNugget box. Suddenly, there are only 6 and 9s.
Yes, and that actually is a truly fatal error. You need the 20 to be in there to make the result possible. And let's just pause for 1 second so we can tell listeners about relatively prime numbers. ChatGPT said that the theorem requires two numbers to be relatively prime. That simply means that the two numbers do not have a common divisor that is larger than 1. So it chooses the numbers 6 and 9. And what is the largest divisor that is common to both of those?
That would be 3.
Right. 6 is 3 times 2. 9 is 3 times 3. So those two numbers are not relatively prime. And I'm a little worried here because if ChatGPT is going to base a calculation on the relative primeness of 6 and 9, it's not going to go very well.
Well, let's keep going through its answer and see where it leads us. ChatGPT went on to say, to find the largest number of McNuggets that cannot be purchased using combinations of 6 and 9, we can use a formula based on the Chicken McNugget theorem. And the formula it settles on is the quantity 6 times 9 minus the quantity 6 plus 9, which simplifies to 54 minus 15, which of course gives you 39. So it completes its answer by saying, so the largest number of McNuggets that cannot be purchased using combinations of 6 and 9 is 39. Now, putting aside the fact that it completely discarded the 20, putting aside the fact that 6 and 9 are not relatively prime, the answer 39 is completely wrong because you can make 39 with 5 boxes of 6 and 1 box of 9.
So basically, like it bailed on this whole problem. One of the problems here, aside from what you just noted, is that because 6 and 9 have a common factor of 3 in them, you can only buy combinations that are a multiple of 3. For example, you could never buy 32 or 64 or 128 or anything that is a pure power of 2. So this example doesn't even have a largest non-purchasable quantity. ChatGPT's very first move, which was to get rid of the 20, just completely ruined any chances of solving the problem.
Right.
And you know what I noticed is that in your reading of that, ChatGPT comes across as being very authoritative, like, okay, reader, here's the answer. And very similar to the answer it gave about why are spheres so strong. It just rolled it right out like, here it is. This is the final word.
Right. And that's something that I've noticed in all of the experiments that we've done in putting this episode together is that whether ChatGPT is right or whether it's wrong, whether it knows what it's talking about or whether it's completely off the mark, it provides its answers with the same 100% level of confidence and authority.
The sum of the square roots of any two sides of an isosceles triangle is equal to the square root of the remaining side.
Yeah. And I will say that as somebody who has worked with students on the Chicken McNugget theorem before, we were making fun of the name earlier. It actually is related to a more famous, older version of the problem, which is called the Frobenius coin problem. And there's a lot of important mathematics that goes on in the background that has to do with number theory and modular arithmetic and relative primality. So it's mathematically a very interesting problem. And what I was thinking while listening to the answer is, this sounds like it was written by a student that maybe has been coming to class about 75% of the time and maybe paid a little bit of attention. And it starts off with like, okay, they know there's some theorem they need to quote and they know it has something to do with relative prime. And there's a formula which they blindly appeal to, and then they get a totally wrong answer. And that's what they submit on their midterm. And you have to give it a sad grade when you're evaluating it because it's like, well, okay, you were in class, but this is really not right. So, there's that vibe going on in that response.
Exactly. And interestingly, when we got to this point, we started wondering, what is ChatGPT even doing when we give it a problem like that? How is it even approaching the task of doing a math problem? And I remember we were kind of wondering about that. And I had the idea to ask ChatGPT, how does ChatGPT do math?
That's a fascinating question. We're wondering, can an AI do math? What does ChatGPT have to say about itself?
Well, it gave a very lengthy response, and I don't want to read the entire thing, but I'll give you a couple of snippets. It opened by saying ChatGPT performs math calculations using its underlying natural language processing capabilities and numerical computation. It understands mathematical expressions written in plain text and can generate responses accordingly. Then it lists a few steps that it goes through, including understanding the text, turning the different items in the problem into tokens, parsing those tokens together, applying some type of computation, and then using that to generate a response. But what I really found interesting was after it gave a couple of examples about how it goes through those steps, it added this at the end. ChatGPT itself said, it's important to note that ChatGPT doesn't have inherent mathematical reasoning or a deep understanding of mathematics. Instead, it relies on patterns it has learned from the vast amounts of text data it was trained on. It can handle a wide range of mathematical operations and equations, but its accuracy may vary depending on the complexity and context of the math involved. For more complex math problems, a dedicated math software or calculator would be more reliable. So right there, I love that ChatGPT is giving us in its answer some information about its own fallibility here.
Yeah. And, reading the answer to the Chicken McNuggets problem, it's like, yeah, you really aren't doing math, are you? You're doing something else where you're trying to generate a reasonable response, which I sometimes think students do also when they're writing answers on their tests. And it came up with something that reads like, yeah, this is a potential answer, but it's not actually the correct answer. Now, this makes me wonder, though. I do know that ChatGPT over the last couple of years has gotten more sophisticated. Was this the most recent version of ChatGPT that you asked these questions to?
Funny you should ask that. No, it wasn't. It's the most recent version that's available to the public to use for free, which is ChatGPT 3.5. But guess what? My son, who we were talking about earlier, the one who helped with our opening sketch, he actually pays for ChatGPT 4. And so I asked him if he wouldn't mind helping us out by asking some of these same questions of ChatGPT 4 to see if we got the same answer or if we got something that was maybe a little bit closer to correct.
Oh, so we can take that exact same prompt about the Chicken McNuggets problem and ask ChatGPT 4 what the answer is.
That's right. And would you like to hear what it said?
Oh, boy, would I. Yes.
ChatGPT 4 said this: the largest number of McNuggets that can't be purchased is 43.
Bam! That is the right answer.
Oh, it is? That's fantastic. Should we stop there, or do you want to hear more of what it had to say?
Oh, I want to know more. In particular, I want to know about its reasoning.
All right. It says, this problem is known as the Frobenius coin problem, or the Chicken McNugget theorem in a more colloquial sense. The theorem states that the largest number that can't be formed by a linear combination of A and B, where A and B are coprime, is A times B minus A minus B. In the McNuggets case, we need to find such a number using the quantities 6, 9, and 20. First, notice that 6 and 9 are not coprime. Look at that, Pete. ChatGPT 4 noticed something that ChatGPT 3.5 totally missed.
Yeah, and not only that, but there is a much more sophisticated response in the works here. And GPT-4 is setting things up with a lot more actual authority. Like, I know what's going on in this problem. It reads a lot better.
Trust me, I know what I'm doing.
It does. So to continue, it said, first notice that 6 and 9 are not coprime. They share a common factor of 3. But 3 and 20 are coprime. For 3 and 20, the largest number you can't form would be 3 times 20 minus 3 minus 20, which it says equals 60 minus 23. So then it simplifies 60 minus 23 as 37. It goes on to say, but since we actually have 6 and 9 instead of 3, they are multiples of 3, you could also add a single 6 to 37 to get 43. Thus, the largest number of McNuggets that can't be purchased using quantities 6, 9, and 20 is 43.
That's really pretty impressive. I have to say, a little bit at the end, I'm not entirely sure what is enabling ChatGPT to just so easily say, but it wasn't 3 and 20. We actually had a 6 and a 9, so you can just add 6 and bam, the answer is 43. I might like to go through and just unpack that a little bit. If a student had written that, say, on an exam and submitted that as the answer, I would be inclined to give them either full credit or maybe dock a point. It depends. I'd have to go in and look, but there's some fuzziness there at the end. Like, how is that justified to just add a 6 and call it a day? But overall, that answer is ultimately correct. The answer is 43. And it was presented with much greater clarity and apparent understanding.
It was. I was a little bit hesitant, though, to completely just accept that it was getting this right by doing the math, because as our listeners might be aware, ChatGPT is trained on gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of sample data, training data that they've combed from the internet. And it has, quote unquote, read tons and tons of data in training itself. So what I was wondering is, in all of that data, was the answer to the Chicken McNugget problem maybe somewhere in there? Did ChatGPT already have access to reading that answer? And I was wondering how we could sort of put that to the test.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wondered that same thing as well. And so I sort of think there are a couple of things we could do. One, we could rewrite the prompt and strip out the context about Chicken McNuggets, like no more nuggets. Now they're t-shirts. And instead of boxes, let's say packages, right? So we're trying to kind of trick it a little bit. And I think let's give it one extra number to deal with. So instead of just 3 numbers, let's give it 4. How does that sound?
That sounded great to me. And the prompt we fed to ChatGPT 4 next was a variation of this problem that it would never have come across. And here's how we wrote it. T-Shirt World sells shirts in packages of 6, 10, 14, and 105. You can buy exactly 16 shirts by buying a pack of 6 and a pack of 10, but there is no way to buy exactly 13 shirts. What is the largest number of shirts that cannot be purchased? Now, before we go to ChatGPT's answer, Pete, Why did we pick these four numbers in particular?
Well, first I wanted to add a fourth quantity to make the problem a bit harder, to push ChatGPT's boundaries a little. Notice that the first three numbers, 6, 10, and 14, are all even. So they're not relatively prime. They have a factor of 2 in common. But when we add 105 to the list, we end up with four numbers that are relatively prime. The largest common factor now is 1. Okay, so far so good. But notice that 6, 10, and 105 are themselves relatively prime. And what I was trying to get at here was to see how ChatGPT would handle the situation. Like, would it try to reduce the list to just three numbers, or would it work with all four of them? I was curious to find out.
All right, so let's take a look at the answer that GPT-4 gave us. It started off by saying the largest number of shirts that could not be purchased is 29.
Okay, that is definitely not right because, for example, any number that's less than 105 and also odd, you can't get that either, right? Because the smaller packages contain an even number of shirts. So you can't use those smaller packages to generate a combination of some odd quantity. That means you will never achieve any odd number that's less than 105. So minimally, we know the answer has to be at least 103. We know we cannot get 103.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, I didn't think it through quite as far as you did, but the very first thing that I did was ask myself, okay, if 29 is the largest number of shirts that can't be purchased, what about 30? Well, I guess 3 packs of 10 would be 30. What about 31? And that's as far as I got before I went, there's a number that's larger than 29 that can't be made out of these particular package sizes. And I stopped there, but you're right. You can't make any odd number until you get to 105.
Right. Yeah. Good reasoning. I mean, we used a slightly different approach, but we both knew pretty quickly 29 is not the right answer.
After it did all this, I decided to ask GPT-4 the same question that we asked GPT-3, namely, how does ChatGPT do math? I wanted to see what it had to say compared to its younger sibling. And here's what it had to say. ChatGPT performs basic math calculations by interpreting the numerical and mathematical operators in the text it receives. However, it's not designed for complex mathematical computation. It processes mathematical expressions by parsing the text input and applying built-in algorithms for basic arithmetic, such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. The architecture isn't specialized for math, but can handle simple expressions. For more complex calculations, specialized software or programming languages like Python are generally better suited.
That's really interesting. It basically said the same thing, right? Like if you look at what GPT 3.5 said and you look at GPT 4, both responses reflect the fact that no special mathematical training processing capabilities have been built in beyond, I would guess, simple arithmetic. So it's deferring people to a package or some other platform like Python or perhaps Mathematica, some other system to carry out the mathematical complexity. In other words, hey, human, you're still needed here because I am not set up to do actual mathematics. You know what needs to get done. Go take it to some other system. That system will give you a better answer.
Exactly. And you can't fault it for saying that because it's actually right when it's telling you don't trust ChatGPT to do your complex calculations.
But we didn't know that until we asked it, how do you do math? When we said, hey, ChatGPT, please solve the Chicken McNuggets problem for us. It said, aye, Captain, here's the answer. And it read like it knew what it was talking about.
Right. So we know that ChatGPT doesn't actually do math according to its own answer. And we know that it gets some math right and some math wrong. But where do you think this leaves us in terms of our opening question? Can AI do math?
Well, first of all, I'm going to breathe a sigh of relief because AI may be coming for mathematics, but I think my job is still pretty secure. I'm not super worried at this moment that AI is going to come along, certainly not ChatGPT, and just displace all of the mathematicians of the world.
They took our jobs. Yeah, they're down.
Second of all, I think we should take a step back because this is a very interesting question. It's really about the future and it's about what might come to pass. What possibilities are there within AI for creating a system that can do mathematics? And that's where I want us to focus. What does it mean to say this system can do or is doing mathematics? What does that mean?
Well, I can approach that question from the angle of my career as an elementary school teacher and ask, what do I mean when I ask if my students can do math? So if I've just taught a unit on multiplying 2-digit numbers and I want to assess if my students understand the math and can do it, the way that I would assess that is by giving them some test questions. And if the students answer those questions correctly, then I would determine that they understand this math and they can do it. But now I wonder, we gave ChatGPT some questions and it got some of those right. I don't know that I would just as quickly give it credit for understanding and doing math that I would give to a student in the same situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I would have a similar response as a former college professor. If I wanted to know if my students were learning the material and if they were understanding and doing math, I would think of similar assessment activities, right? I want to point out something that has come up on the show several times over the year and a half that we've been doing it. And that's that mathematics itself is very multifaceted. So sometimes we will talk about mathematics as a useful tool, as a system, a scientific approach to problem solving, often relating to quantity, but certainly dealing with things like structures and geometry and so forth. Math is useful. Math is also beautiful. So whatever it means to do mathematics, that aspect of beauty would have to be present within the system because math is like art. At times, anyway, it is very artful. So that would have to be present as well. And I'm not sure that I've seen anything along those lines yet from a system like ChatGPT.
Well, Pete, artificial intelligence begins with art.
Oh man, you're right. I take it all back.
But seriously, let me ask you a question then based on what you just said. What do you think you would need to see an AI do for you to then say, now we're getting somewhere? Now I think this AI is actually doing math.
Well, it would certainly have to tap into that sense of beauty. And so perhaps I'm speaking as a mathematician here because I have a very special relationship to this notion of the beauty of mathematics. But if ChatGPT or some other system were able to ask me a question that was new or novel, that made me think, whoa, there's more to math than I knew. There is something here that I hadn't thought about before. And now, because of this AI's question, I need to go answer it. I must go answer this question. That's how compelling it is. If an AI system were able to demonstrate that kind of capacity, I think lots and lots of mathematicians would put down their chalk at the chalkboard and go, wait, what did you just ask me? And I don't think we're there yet.
No, we're not. But I love where you're going with that answer, that it's not enough for the AI to simply regurgitate and repackage the information that it was trained on and just spit it out with a new phrasing. It would have to actually innovate and create something new that no one had done before, to exceed its programming, to do more than what we told it to do, and to take a step above and start creating something brand new. That would really be impressive, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that focus on creation, innovation, novelty, that is the kind of thing that mathematicians do when they are engaging in mathematics. So, a calculator can give you an answer to a problem if you know the right way to enter it. And ChatGPT has opened up the possibility for you can ask and enter, if you will, questions in a much broader, more natural way now. You can just essentially speak a question and ChatGPT will answer you, and it can all be handled in the English language. What we're talking about here, though, is insight, intuition, understanding, reasoning. And those are the things, by the way, that within every discipline of AI, that's sort of the goal, right? Can AI do X? Well, what has to happen is it needs to be able to push the boundaries of X. It needs to show us something new that we didn't already know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, the day that that happens, I think that's the day that you and I might be able to stop hosting the Math Club and hand it over to a new AI host.
And in that case, I'm heading to the break room because I heard there are snacks.
Did somebody say new AI host? Oh my gosh. I've been waiting for this moment for so long. I'm ready, guys. What are we doing an episode about?
Easy there, Alexa. Nobody's inviting you to host the show. We're just talking about something that could happen someday.
Sounds good. Let me just check my calendar to see when I'm available. Looks like I can do it any day at any time.
Anyway, Pete, I'd like to thank you for yet another interesting conversation. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our listeners about what they think of this episode. And also, listeners, we would love it if you felt so inclined, if you would go to the podcast app of your choice and rate or review us. There is no better way to share the love and build the Math Club community than by giving us a review so that more people can see it and join the club.
The more, the merrier. And before we go, Noah, did you know that on DoorDash, you can order a box of 40 McNuggets? Like, I could have that shipped to my house right now. I am getting kind of hungry.
I'll be right over.
See you later, Math Club.
We'll see you next time.